Good morning. We are back to the Gemara on page Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph 1018, or the bottom. So if you have Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph on the bottom, you count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 from the bottom of the page. It's the Kuf Aleph with one dot there. Yeah, the Kuf Aleph with one dot. 2 dots is Bays, 1 dot, 1. Okay, so it's about,
many lines from the bottom?
About 9 lines or so. 9 lines from the bottom. The line begins with the word Ella, the Makam Suda, and the fourth word is Amy.
That's with 2 bits.
With 1 dot. Kuf Aleph with 1 dot. That's Kuf Aleph on my bet. I'm at Aleph. Okay, so where are we in the Gemara? The Gemara began this whole discussion with a commentary on this custom that many shuls had, and many shuls do have, for the chazan, the gabbai, to make Kiddush in shul Friday night without being followed by a meal. Just making Kiddush in shul. And the discussion was, who is it for and why is it done? And that led us to a discussion on, well, hey, you have to have a meal in the place of your Kiddush. So how do you do that if you're making Kiddush in shul? That's essentially what the discussion was. And in Shmuel's view, well, the Kiddush is for the guests who are eating in shul, and therefore it's in the place of their meal. Rav, however, said, this is not the halachic view, but Rav, however, said, the Kiddush in shul is meant for people who aren't making Kiddush at home because they live alone. And we're going to save them the cost of a cup of wine. They'll hear Kiddush in shul and they go home and eat. Because in Rav's view, one does not need to make Kiddush in their place of their meal. This is the dispute. Right? So Shmuel, we've been discussing Shmuel's view. And the Gemara piled on and said, Rav Anan also followed Shmuel. He also made sure to have a meal in his place. There was a few different sages the Gemara kept on saying. He also agrees. Rav Anan bar Tachlifa, Rav Huna, and Rabbah. The Gemara listed these 3 sages that they agree with Shmuel that the Kiddush requires a meal in its place. And the Gemara brought an instance with each of them where the candle went out or this happened, and they made Kiddush again in the new location because they require a Kiddush in the place where they eat. Right? As opposed to Rav, who disagrees with this entire thing and says Kiddush is a freestanding item, make Kiddush whenever you want and eat whenever you want. It doesn't have to be followed by a meal. Of course, we already know, because we looked at the Shulchan Aruch, that we follow the view of Shmuel. Yeah, this is where we are right now. Yeah?
What if you do it outdoors?
It's irrelevant.
There's no limit as to how big.
Well, the Shulchan Aruch didn't discuss that. If you're eating outdoors,
What if the candles go
one second, you can't eat outdoors on Shabbos unless it's an enclosed area, because otherwise you're carrying. Right? Then that whole enclosed area, it's still an enclosed property area, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be considered like one big room, but you're allowed to move from one spot to the other, right?
Well,
Nothing.
Be able to hear the Kiddush, right?
You have to be able to hear the Kiddush, certainly.
Hey.
The candles go out, nothing you can do. Okay, so the last thing the Gemara said was that Rabbah was of the view that you have to make Kiddush in the place where you eat. And this is the story of Abaye. Abaye was adopted by Rabbah. He said...
Rabbah, not Rav.
Rabbah, not Rav. That's right. That's right. Rav and Shmuel are disputing as to whether or not one needs a meal following their Kiddush. Shmuel says, yes, you require a meal following the Kiddush, otherwise your Kiddush is invalid. Rav says, Kiddush is independent, make Kiddush and then eat whenever you want, wherever you want, irrelevant. And the Gemara commented by saying that Rabbah falls in line with Shmuel, that one requires Kiddush in his place. What was the incident? Abaye, who was adopted by Rabbah, said that one time he was invited to go eat somewhere else, and he heard Rabbah make Kiddush, and Rabbah told him, eat something here now, because you might go to the other place, and their candle's going to go out, you won't be able to have your meal, and then your Kiddush will have been invalid because you're not having a meal in the place of your Kiddush. So eat something now while you're here, and then go there and enjoy your meal. Right, so this was the Gemara indicating that Rabbah agrees with Shmuel that one requires to eat Kiddush in the place. The Gemara is going to challenge this perception that Rabbah follows Shmuel, that one requires Kiddush in the place of eating. Okay. That's where the Gemara is. Eini, says the Gemara, is this so? Is it indeed the case that Rabbah is of the view that one, like Shmuel, that Kiddush requires a meal in its place? Is that the case? But Abaye himself said, the one who told us the incident of Rabbah telling him to make Kiddush, to eat something because you have to have Kiddush in the place of your meal, he himself told us something else which seems to contradict this. He said like this, Call Mili Demar, all the behaviors of master, his master being Rabbah, his adopted father, Call Mili Demar, all the things of our master, have of it he would do Kerav, following the view of Rav. Rabbah was consistently following Rav's view. Levar, with the exception of Mahani Tlas, the following three cases, the Avad Kishmuel, where he followed Shmuel. Namely, Shmuel said, number one, Matirin mi beged lebeged, you may take the tzitzis, the fringes, off of one garment and put it on another. Rav is of the view you may not do so because it constitutes a disgrace to the tzitzis, or you're like disgracing this garment by taking your tzitzis off, even though you're going to be reattaching it to another one. Rav's view is a disgrace, and Shmuel says, no, it's okay. Abaye tells us, Rabbah followed Shmuel and was okay with taking off a tzitzis and taking it from one garment and putting it on to another, and this is the halacha indeed. Number two, Madlikin min ner l'ner, on Hanukkah, you may light one candle from another. Right? We discussed this a few days ago. The Shabbos candles are designed to produce light. That's the objective. You're meant to enjoy the light of the Shabbos candles, whereas the Hanukkah candles is the reverse. You may not enjoy the candles. The mitzvah is to light them, not to enjoy them. We say in the paragraph that we recite after we light candles, we say, "Ein loner de'ishus leishtamas behem." We have no permission to use the candles. Now, what about lighting one Hanukkah candle from another? Is that considered personal use or not? Rav's view is it's considered personal use, and each Hanukkah candle should not be touched, even to light another Hanukkah candle. And Shmuel says you may. You may take one Hanukkah candle and light it from another. It's not personal use. It's the mitzvah being rolled into another mitzvah. It doesn't violate the respect of the candles when you're using it to light another Hanukkah candle. And Rabbah, again, here followed Shmuel. Likewise, the third case, Shmuel was of the view that Allah could have Shimon begreda, that the law follows Rabbi Shimon with respect to dragging something on Shabbos. Specifically, the Tanya, we learned like this. Rabbi Shimon, there's a few generations here. This is Abaye speaking about his teacher Rabbah and how Rabbah behaved. And now we're saying that Rabbah followed the view of Shmuel, of Shimon, which is way earlier than the Mishnaic era. What did Shimon say? Shimon said, Tanya, we learned, Rabbi Shimon says, Goyer Adam Mita Kisei V'Safsel B'Shabbos. A person may drag a bed, a chair, a bench in the mud on Shabbos, or in the, let's just say, not the mud, on the ground, the
Dirt floor.
The dirt floor. The details of this are very involved, and we're not going to get into all the details, but this is the general outline. Uvovad, you may do so. Uvovad, but so long as Shaliskavin Lasis Charetz, that when he does so, he is not intending to make a furrow. One may not make a furrow in the ground, right? Because that would be constitute like plowing, right? Now, if I am pulling the bench because I want to sit over there, so I need to take the bench from here and move it to there. And it so happens that as I'm pulling it, I can't lift it, it's too heavy. And as I'm pulling it, I make a furrow, like a track. So because my intention is not in the furrow, in fact, my intention is just to move the bench, Rav Shimon says it's allowed. Right? There's a principle, which is, there's two principles in Shabbos. I don't want to get into all the details, but this is the outline. There are two principles when it comes to the laws of Shabbos that strike a balance into what makes something permissible and not permissible. One element is meleches machshavas asar Torah. The Torah forbids intentional malacha, where I intend to produce the result of that malacha, that violated work. But if my intention is one thing and it so happens as a byproduct that a malacha happens, I'm not culpable for that. That wasn't forbidden. That's principle A. Principle B is psik reisha v'lo yomos. That's the principle. The principle of psik reisha, which literally translates as you cut the head off and it's not going to die. That's literally the translation. It's kind of bizarre sample, but this is the Gemara's sample. Person or kid or somebody wants to take the head off of a chicken because he wants to play with the chicken head. So you're going to claim, oh, I didn't want to kill a chicken. I just wanted the chicken head. When you take a chicken head, you kill a chicken, right? Which means if what you're doing, even though you're claiming, oh, I didn't want the net result, if it's so directly automatic, it's a certainty, and the act of doing this is definitely directly linked to the act of the prohibition, then the prohibition still applies, even if it wasn't intended. So these seem like almost two opposite things, right? One is it's only forbidden if I intend to do the malacha. Here, if it's automatic, it's also prohibited. So the balance between these two things is how directly correlated is my act to the unintended consequence. When it comes to chopping a head off, the very act of taking the head, which is what I want, is the same act as killing. When it comes to moving a bench, however, benches don't have to make a furrow. It may make a furrow, it may not make a furrow. So therefore, there's a little bit of a detachment between the moving of the bench, which is my intention and my action, and the net result, which is the furrow. And therefore, drawing this line is always is a whole art in the laws of Shabbos to draw the line between these two principles. So here we have this dispute. When I pull a bench and it makes a furrow, am I allowed? Not allowed.
So just as an example, I'm just trying to think. If you do, let's say if I move this chair on tiles, it's fine.
It's for sure fine.
But if I move it on sand, it's not. I know.
So that's why I said I don't want to get too detailed because it depends how certain is it that it's going to make a furrow, how heavy is the bench, how thick is the mud. It gets into all the details. But this is the general outline. So here, Shmuel followed the view of Rabbi Shimon with respect to the pulling of a bench, that you may do so, even though unintendedly, and I don't care about it, but there's a furrow being made. Yeah. So this is Abaye. Abaye tells us that Rabbah, his teacher, his master, followed Shmuel in 3 instances. He's allowed to move the tzitzis from one to the other. You're allowed to light one Chanukah candle from another, and you may move a bench on Shabbos, even though it's unintended to be making a furrow, so long as I don't intend for the furrow. Now, so the Gemara asks, if these are the only 3 times Rabbah followed Shmuel, so then why in this instance is Rabbah again following Shmuel and making Kiddush in the place of his meal? He should be following Rav. You, Abaye, said that Rabbah follows Rav in every instance with the exception of these 3. There should be a 4th on the list. That Rabbah follows Shmuel, that you have to eat in the place of your meal. Why are you telling me only 3? And this is the same person speaking. It's the same Abaye who lived in Rabbah's house telling us both these things. He's telling us that Rabbah was scrupulous, like Shmuel, to make Kiddush in his place. But then he tells us, oh, Rabbah only followed Shmuel in 3 cases. No, it's not. It's a 4th case.
Shmuel in those cases were all leniencies.
Oh, that's the Gemara's answer.
That they're what? Sorry?
They're all leniencies.
Yeah. Gemara answers, when Abaye told us that Rabbah follows Rav in every case, it's talking about in cases where Rabbah was stringent. But Kekule Rav, to follow the leniencies of Rav, as in this case, Rav allowed you to make Kiddush without a meal following it. Lo yahava avid, not necessarily would Rabbah follow. So the 3 cases that Abaye lists as an exception, that Rabbah followed Shmuel, is when Shmuel was lenient. But when Shmuel was strict, he was strict anyway. Which means, in other words, Rabbah was whenever there's a dispute between Rav and Shmuel, Rabbah was strict, period. With these 3 cases where he went lenient like Shmuel. That's basically the statement here. That's the clarification. So, Baruch Shekivanta. Blessed that you hit it on the target.
If you cut the head off a worm, the worm grows another head.
Yeah, the Paleontalian worms.
So
Does that count as killing a
the
paleo?
question is causing something to grow.
Maybe there's a prohibition in that. It's one of the most fascinating things. But we're not going to go on that tangent.
No.
That by the way, we'll have to go a small tangent. That worm you're describing, I think it's called Paleontalian worm, right? You cut it, and it it grows a new head and a new
That's right.
backside of thing, which and that's how it reproduces, right? It splits itself off, which means every worm that you're looking at, some part of its DNA was there at the creation, as opposed to everything else where it's not me, it's my great grandparents that were there at creation, back to Adam. The worm, it's some part of it itself actually was at creation. That's one cool, fascinating thing. And the other is, and scientists are studying this, because there's something in their DNA that instructs it to regrow, to regenerate its organs, which means there is a genetic code that tells the body not to reproduce organs, and you can reteach it to reproduce organs if you crack that code. So it's being studied now. Now, if that's not messianic, I don't know what is.
So for us,
Yeah, for humans.
no, I'm saying, but for us, there's nothing in the DNA that goes back to Adam, but the soul.
Yeah, the Neshama for sure.
Okay,
It may be
but
somewhere in your
in-
DNA is traced back to Adam, but not certain. There's no particles left of it. Right? There's no particles of me that existed in times of Adam and Eve, but the worm, yes, because it was always there. It's one of the most cool, one of the coolest things. Okay,
Was
a
it
little
there-
side tangent.
Was it there in us pre the sin of the,
Apple.
I presume so. It's not a snake.
it was taken away?
It's not a snake. It's not a snake. I presume it was there before the
It was
But the-
Satan.
the worm.
Satan.
No, but the worm's nothing to do with the snake.
No,
They're different species. So why would they be around by creation? See, why not? Anyway, I just think it's fascinating. Okay, let's go back to the Gemara. I don't want to take too much on this, but it blows my mind. Okay.
Yeah.
So now where are we? So where are we? We are two views with respect to Kiddush in the place of the meal. Rav, Kiddush is independent. You don't have to do it in the place of a meal. Rabba, Shmuel, Rav Anan, Rav Huna, and the halacha is that Kiddush requires a meal. And we just spent the last few lines clarifying Rabba's position that indeed he is always stringent whenever there's a dispute between Rav and Shmuel, including this case,
Except for
where
the sin.
Shmuel says you have to have a meal in the place of your Kiddush, with the exception of 3 cases in which he follows lenient like Shmuel. Okay, now the Gemara addresses another question, which is another side tangent, which will take us for the next few pages. And when we're done, I hope to learn the Shulchan Aruch on this section also. Siman Kuf Ayin Ches. Siman Kuf Ayin Ches is the laws which you mentioned, because you're learning brachas, which is the laws of moving locations in the middle of a meal, unrelated to Shabbos,
Or Kiddush.
or Kiddush at all. Now, how do we get there from Kiddush? Because we're describing making Kiddush in Shul and eating somewhere else. So Rav and Shmuel disputed, is that Kiddush valid or not? Rav said, yeah, the Kiddush is valid, doesn't have to be in the place of a meal. Shmuel says, no, it's not valid unless you happen to be a guest eating in Shul. Right? But they both agreed that the bracha hagafen doesn't extend to your house, because when you get home, you're in a new place, you have to make a bracha again hagafen. Right? Because hagafen is not a question of Kiddush, it's a question of the cup of wine, which happens to be attached to Kiddush here, but it's the cup of wine that's the issue. And if you go home, even if you fulfilled your obligation for Kiddush as per Rav, you still got to make hagafen again if you want to drink wine at home. Okay. Rav and Shmuel agreed with that. Now we're going to have a dispute where Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even hagafen, you can go home and drink wine, and your hagafen was covered by your Kiddush and Shul. Because in his view, not only does he agree with Rav that you don't have to have a meal in the place of your Kiddush, but he actually even is of the view that you don't have to make a hagafen in the place of your drinking. You make a hagafen in one place, drink, go home, keep on drinking, because that hagafen extends. Obviously, this is an outlier. This is not the halacha. But once it's brought up, the Gemara is now going to discuss this whole idea of moving location during a meal. And that becomes chapter 178 in the Shulchan Aruch, quite an involved and detailed chapter, but with our endurance, God willing, we will get there and go through these halachas because they're very fascinating. And if you remember them, good for you. And if you remind me, there's a parenthesis in the Alter Shulchan Aruch that I once wrote about, which seems to undermine some of the other halachas, but you have to remember when we get there. Okay, so let's read. Third line from the bottom of the page. Rabbi Yochanan says, back to the case of making Kiddush and Shul on Friday night. He says, not only do I agree with Rav that the Kiddush is valid, because Kiddush doesn't require a meal following it. But Rabbi Yochanan is of the view, Af Yedei Yayin Nami Yotzu. He has the person making Kiddush and Shol, and the people answering Amen to the Kiddush and Shol, presumably, have fulfilled their obligation to make the bracha over the wine. And therefore, when they go home, they do not have to make a new bracha on Hagafen, because the Hagafen can extend it from Shul all the way to their house. Right? And Rabbi Yochanan follows his view. He's consistent with his own thinking. Rab Chanan, son of Abaye, said, Amar Rapadas, in the name of Rapadas, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So what did Rabbi Yochanan say? Quote, Echad Shinayayin, whether you get a new glass of wine, top of Kuf Aleph Amid Beis, top of 101b, the Echad Shinei Makoim, or whether you change location, Ein Sarach Levarach, you don't have to make another bracha. So in Rabbi Yochanan's view, you're drinking wine, and a new glass of wine, a new wine arrives, no new bracha. The halacha, by the way, is that if a person gets a new glass of wine that was unexpected, he wasn't expecting to get this new cup of wine, and this new cup of wine is of a more prestigious nature than the wine he's been drinking until now, he makes a new bracha, hatayva meitiv. It's not commonly practiced because nowadays we pretty much expect wine to come, whatever we have in the house. But if you're like somehow this new cup of wine arrives and it's way better than the one you had before, you make a bracha called hatayva meitiv. I've seen people do it. But in Rabbi Yochanan's view, new glass of wine comes, no new bracha. Not only that, but even if you change location, so you're drinking in one house, and you decide to go to your neighbor's house, and you have a glass of wine there, no new bracha in Rabbi Yochanan's view. And therefore, the same thing with Kiddush and Shol. No new bracha on the wine when you get home. Certainly no new Kiddush, because you fulfilled your obligation with that. As per Rav, you don't have to have a meal in the place of your Kiddush. And when you go home, no new bracha hagafen, because it extended all the way from Shol. Again, this is so foreign to us because it's not the halacha.
Sorry, don't you have like a responsibility to do it just for like Maritain? What if you're going to someone's house and he doesn't know you did Kiddush at synagogue?
Good question.
And then you start drinking.
Good question.
Without print.
Good question. I don't know. I don't know that the Gemara is going to be spending too much time defending Rabbi Yochanan, because the Gemara actually right now is going to reject Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to read that. And then after Shavuos, we're going to see how the Gemara goes back to our view, which is when you move locations, you do have to make a new bracha. And the Gemara is going to get into the details of what kind of foods are you eating and how far are you going. A new house, a new room, a new building. Are you carrying the food as you're eating it? Is it a bread? Is it a bagel? Is it a apple? We're going to get into all that.
Talk about how big the room could be. For
So-
example, you're in the Bell Center. You're sitting on one side of the.
It doesn't matter. In that regard, it doesn't matter. We're going to get into that as well. Yeah, we'll get into all that. Okay, especially when we get to the Alter Shulchan Aruch, chapter 178. Okay, so the Gemara now rejects Rabbi Yochanan's view, and we'll conclude with that. Meisvei, the Gemara challenges Rabbi Yochanan's view. What kind of question is on Meisvei? Anybody remember?
I think is that the one where you're quoting from a higher source?
Source high, very good. Source higher than yourself, yeah? Right, when the Gemara introduces the question, depending on the word it uses to introduce the question, it tells us what kind of question it is. Right? Rami is when you have two sources equal. Maskif is when you're giving a logical objection. Ibaya is an inquiry. And Meisvei is when I quote a source higher than you. So Rabbi Yochanan is the first generation of the Gemara, and the Gemara is now going to quote a source that's from the Mishnaic era, which is a source beyond Rabbi Yochanan. And what does that source say? This is from Berachos. This is where you know it from. The source reads, this Mishnaic text reads, Shinoi Makom, if a person changes location, Sarach Levarach, he must make a new bracha. If you move from one place to another, you got to make a bracha again. But Shinoi Yayin, if you get a new cup of wine, Ein Sarach Levarach, you don't have to make a bracha. As I explained, unless the wine is of a greater value, and then you make a different bracha called Hatayva Meitiv. But at any rate, here the Mishnah says straight out that if you move locations, you have to make a new bracha, and there's no dissenting view. And therefore, to Yufta, Rabbi Yochanan to Yufta. This indeed presents a rejection of Rabbi Yochanan's view, or at least a refutation of Rabbi Yochanan's view. So we're back to the view that both Rav and Shmuel agree, even though Rav and Shmuel disagree on the question of Kiddush, whether Kiddush requires the meal that follows or not. Rav says it doesn't require a meal. Shmuel says it does, and halacha follows Shmuel. But they both agree that when you heard Kiddush and you go home, whether you fulfilled your obligation of Kiddush or not, you definitely got to make a new bracha hagafim when you go home, because the bracha does not extend from one place to another, and that remains the halacha. And God willing, after Yom Tif, we're going to get into the details of when does this halacha apply? What am I eating? How far did I move? And so on and so forth. That'll be for the next page or two, and then we will look at Siman Kufay Neches, chapter 178 in Shulchan Aruch, which I'm really looking forward to doing with you because it's very involved, it's very exciting, it's a lot of details. Hopefully we can try to remember all of it. Okay, have a wonderful day, Eden.